Class is now in session. I'm Professor Hockey, and today we will be recapping day 11 and the final day of the first round of the NHL playoffs. Just two more series left to conclude, and both of them would finish tonight. The first one being the Canadiens versus the Flyers. The Flyers up 3-2 in the series, looking to close it out in Game 6, and they would manage to do so with a 3-2 victory. It started off quite well for the Flyers, at least offensively. Goals from Provorov within the first 30 seconds, and then Kevin Hayes to make it 2-0 Flyers. And at that point, it looked like, this game might be over, but the Canadiens put up a big fight. They would get the goal from Suzuki to cut the lead in half, 2-1. Then Raffl would eventually add to it, 3-1 Flyers. Suzuki would get another to make it 3-2, but that would be the only scoring. The back half of this game was basically just filled with the Flyers trying to defend, pushing this puck out. It was kind of boring hockey, I guess you could say, as the Canadiens were trying but couldn't really muster up too much pressure. Meanwhile, the Flyers were basically just not pushing at all, and they end up getting the victory by 1 goal. Good news for the Flyers, I guess, is of course the fact that they won, but also the fact that the big thing here for the Flyers that I've noticed is it seems as though they've got great depth in terms of offense. It seems as though basically whichever defensive pairing is on, those players have a chance to score. It feels basically every single game has these different scores for the Philadelphia Flyers. And of course, in the games that they won in this series, their defense looked solid and Carter Hart looked very, very good. The bad news for the Flyers is that, maybe the Canadiens were a lot better than their seeding indicated, but this was, of course, the 24th ranked team in the NHL. They just barely squeaked into this expanded playoff format, and yet the Flyers had a lot of trouble closing this out. The 2 games they lost, they really didn't have much control of at all, and in the 4 games that they won, these were all I guess one of them was a 2-0 victory, but very, very close games. And in this one, 3 goals in this game, all 3 of them on pretty lucky bounces. There's basically a world that exists in which the Flyers have 0 goals in this game, and we would go to a Game 7. So fortunate bounces for the Flyers lead to this Game 6 victory. So they didn't show me a lot in this series that really gives me faith in this Flyers team that they can actually go far in the playoffs. And coming up against a really difficult matchup against the New York Islanders, who of course play so well basically every single game, and even when they don't, they always make sure to bring it in the following one. I'm really not sure how much, even with the Flyers being the higher seed, how much of a chance the Flyers have in that series if they can play a lot better than they did here against the Canadiens, or if the Canadiens are actually a much bigger challenge than I've anticipated, then they could move on. But right now, there wasn't enough shown for me that really gives me much faith in Philadelphia. On the Canadian side, moving forward, things are looking quite bright in the future for the Canadiens. Carey Price has had multiple regular seasons where he's been more so of an average goaltender. A lot of people started sort of, ranking him not in the top 5, not even in the top 10 in terms of goaltending, but here in these playoffs, he really showed himself to still be one of the best goaltenders in the NHL, and it'll be interesting to see once the start of the next regular season happens, whether or not Carey Price will resume this playoff and play-ins form that he's shown, where he is one of the best, or if he will return back to the regular season form that he's had for the past couple of years, at which point the Canadiens may struggle once more to actually make the playoffs. However, they've still got some great young players at their core, players like Domi, Gallagher, Danault, all pretty young, all things considered, as well as some really young players like Kotkaniemi, who had issues during this regular season, was moved down to the AHL at a point, but was solid throughout these playoffs. And of course, Nick Suzuki, who was sort of this big star for the Canadiens, especially in this series in particular. He is going to be a player to watch with great interest as we move on to the next season. Probably going to be one of the better young forwards in the NHL judging by this series alone. And so the Canadiens, maybe they won't be a contender next season, but within 3 years, this will probably be a team that is in the playoff picture relatively consistently. Then the next series and the final series, it would be Canucks versus Blues. The Canucks would look to close out the Blues in Game 6, and that they would do with a commanding 6-2 victory to eliminate the defending Stanley Cup champions. I had said after Game 5 that the Blues were the better team through games 3, 4, and 5, even in that game 5 loss, and the Canucks will have to play a lot more like they did in the first couple of games of this series than they did in the last 3, and that's exactly what they managed to do here. The Canucks were better, especially early on, and that allowed them to rack up these goals. They got goals from Beagle, from Roussel, and eventually score effects sort of took into effect that made it so that the Blues pushed back a bit, but that was mostly because the Canucks had this big lead. They would then get goal from Stetcher, from Besser, before finally Jaden Schwartz would make it 4-1 Canucks, but then they would once again get another one from Tyler Mott, 5-1. A late goal would come from Schwartz again, but then Mott would close it out with the empty netter for the 6-2 victory. So a great win for the Canucks as they knock off the defending Stanley Cup champs and moved on to the second round to face off against a really tough opponent, probably even tougher than the Blues, the Vegas Golden Knights. Good news for the Vancouver Canucks. Their offense continues to just click at every single level here. Their top players like Pettersson, Besser, JT Miller, Bo Horvat have all looked very, very good. And even more so, their depth players, Roussel has been contributing, Tyler Mott has been contributing, Tanner Pearson has been contributing. So on the offensive side, the Canucks are really set up quite well. This is a young team, this is a hungry team, and so they're really able to pot these goals. And on the back end, Jacob Markstrom, with the elimination of Carey Price, with the elimination of Jonas Korpisalo, of these last 8 goaltenders left in the playoffs, Jacob Markstrom is probably the best one remaining, at least in terms of performance during these playoffs. And so that will give the Canucks a huge advantage. I mean, I guess he would be competitive with Semyon Varlamov of the New York Islanders, but that is he's certainly aided by just the way the Islanders play. In terms for Jacob Markstrom, he's definitely been this big star for the Vancouver Canucks, and he's going to have to do that again here in this coming series, because the bad news for the Canucks is that while their offense has been spectacular and their goaltending has been spectacular, the defense has left a bit to be desired. This is obviously still, as I said, a young team like the Canucks, and they're more so pushing the pace compared to actually defending all so much, and so they've been really reliant thus far on Jacob Markstrom. But if Markstrom sort of falters even slightly, a team like the Golden Knights, who are extremely offensively gifted, much more so you could say than the St. Louis Blues, they will be punished significantly. And so on the back end, that is obviously the big worry for the Vancouver Canucks. For the St. Louis Blues moving forward, of course, things are still perfectly fine. As I had mentioned with the Washington Capitals, this is a team that won the Stanley Cup. Literally last year, we were in the offseason of the Blues Stanley Cup as the Stanley Cup champions. And so moving forward, the Blues, I'm sure, are perfectly fine with how this has gone. Obviously not happy that they lost in this first round, but still, they've got pretty young players still going. Braden Shen, Vladimir Tarasenko, Jaden Schwartz, Colton Parayko. Jordan Binnington is obviously somewhat of a question mark moving forward. He was still quite solid through this regular season. He's just not really done much in these playoffs, been pretty bad in these playoffs. But then again, there have been a lot of players who, after this extended break and coming into these playoffs, have not really regained their form, and Binnington is absolutely one of them. So moving into the next regular season, will he be as bad as he was during these playoffs? Maybe not, probably not, but that is something to watch. And also going to be an interesting offseason for the St. Louis Blues, as their best defender, Alex Pietrangelo, one of the best defenders in the NHL as well, his contract is up. We'll see who is the team to pay him the big money. Will it be the St. Louis Blues or will it be someone else? Because it would be a pretty big loss for the Blues if they lost Pietrangelo. But that will do it for this recap. That will do it for the first round. In terms of predictions, I had said the Flyers would win in 5 games. It took them 1 extra, but they would still end up taking the series. And for the Canucks Blues, I had said the Blues would win in 6 games. And while this series did, in fact, only last those 6 games, it was the Canucks coming out victorious compared to the Blues. So great first round, and the second round matchups are looking even more exciting. Class dismissed.